But I'm going to turn the whole thing over to Ann Ribbons. Thank you, Ann, for
Thank you,
putting this
Carolyn.
together and presenting it for the commission.
Great, great. Well, my name is Ann Ribbons, and I'm a resident of Berlin. And I want to thank the commission for the opportunity to talk about this really pressing environmental crisis. I'm also grateful to each of the commissioners for the hard work that you do every day to preserve and protect the natural world in Berlin and for the benefit of all of us. I know a little bit about the commission's work because I happen to be married to a commissioner. And for those of you in the room who do not know him, it's AJ Moses sitting right over there. And he will probably be my co-commentator tonight. Not sure, but there is that chance. And I recognize that there may be people on the Zoom or cable channel who don't live in Berlin. So our welcome extends to everybody who's participating tonight in the audience. This presentation was presented by the Massachusetts chapter of the Sierra Club. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the mission of the Sierra Club, I thought I'd just let you know a little bit about what their mission is. First of all, they push for a transition to a clean energy economy, including efficient, clean transportation. They also work to reduce toxic pollution, and they address threats to community health and the environment. AJ and I have been members of the Sierra Club for decades, and it wasn't until we moved to Massachusetts 4 years ago that we decided we wanted to get more involved in the organization. So we joined the Massachusetts chapter and got involved in their toxics team. And as part of that work, AJ has been cataloging all of the artificial turf fields across the state. And I've gotten very involved in the plastic pollution issue. Well, let's dive right in. Although looking at that picture, I'm not sure I would want to dive into that body of water. You know, when you look at this picture, it's sadly familiar. You've certainly seen plastic litter everywhere, along highways, in the streets, on beaches. You've driven past waste facilities where plastic refuse is spilling out. And you've taken part maybe in one of our local community cleanups where the predominant trash is plastic. You've seen pictures of fish and birds choked by plastic. And these are the kinds of plastic you can actually see. As plastic breaks down, the hazards to our health and the environment only multiply. In this presentation, you'll hear about the monumental nature of the plastic pollution crisis and understand why it's reached the proportions it has. The talk is about 30 minutes, so I'd ask people to hold their questions and comments until the end. And then I welcome the time for us to have a conversation about the information I've presented. I'd really like you to kind of keep track of what's new or what's particularly troubling in what you're hearing tonight. So this is the agenda. We're going to talk about plastic pollution with the goal of shedding light on the problems that plastics pose to our health, the environment, and its contribution to climate change. We're going to talk about why it's so hard to make progress on changes. And we're going to identify some current and potential solutions. The intent tonight is to share information that you might not be aware of. I certainly learned a lot in the 9 months that it took to put together this presentation, as well as inspire you to be more mindful of the impact of some of your own choices when it comes to plastic, and hopefully move you to take action beyond what you do in your own household into a town or even a state level. Because I think collectively, I know collectively, we can make a bigger difference than we could individually. There are so many aspects to plastics that we've divided this talk into 4 focus areas. The first is life cycle, where plastic comes from and how it's disposed. We'll talk about health and environmental impacts, and we'll talk about the chemicals and toxicity that relate to plastics. Now, disclaimer, I am neither a chemist nor a toxicologist. So that part of the presentation is going to be at a pretty high level. And then we'll talk about the biggest culprit when it comes to plastic pollution, and that's single-use plastics. Moving into the life cycle of plastics, as you probably already know, plastic comes from fossil fuels. Plastic production starts with the extraction of oil. And then chemicals and resins are added which don't bind to the plastic polymer, so they leach out. Some processes release toxic substances and carcinogens into our water, our soil, and our air. In the consumption phase, we find plastic in the packaging of products from food to most consumer goods. There's plastic in our synthetic clothing, our furniture, our coffee makers, basically in everything. Once it's discarded, plastic is either incinerated, dumped into overflowing landfills, or ends up as litter. And it's important to note that greenhouse gases are emitted in every phase of the plastic life cycle, from refining to production to the ways that plastic is managed as a waste product, where it's contributing significantly to the carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere and fueling climate change. Before I got into this topic, I didn't connect plastic pollution and climate change, but now I know they're inextricably linked. The process of making plastic, in fact, is so energy intensive that if the plastics industry were a country, it would be the 5th largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. Continuing on with the life cycle of plastics, people think they're doing their part by recycling, but most plastics aren't recyclable. Of all the plastics produced, only 5% is in fact recycled. Plastic does not biodegrade. It just breaks down into smaller pieces. And when those pieces are less than 5 millimeters, they're called microplastics and are nearly impossible to remove from our drinking water, food, and air. Over the past decade, scientists have found microplastics in every environment they've tested, from the deepest oceans to the highest mountaintops, from the tropics to the poles. AJ has seen plastic bags 100 feet below the surface when he's been scuba diving. Most recently, plastic has been discovered in human blood. We're producing more new plastic products at a much greater rate than we can possibly use or reuse the plastic we currently have. And to make matters worse, big brands are currently increasing their production of plastics, which threatens the global climate, communities, and ecosystems around the world. The fourth point on this slide is something that's I really want to emphasize, and that is marginalized communities bear the burden of plastic pollution. Plastic manufacturing facilities and waste incineration facilities are usually located in low-income, Black and Brown, and non-English speaking communities. If you look at where more than 90% of climate pollution is released by the plastics industry, it's in 18 communities in the whole country. How would you like it if your life expectancy was dependent on your zip code? If we keep increasing the production of plastics, which is already beyond the way we can use or reuse it, what does that mean for the world? And if only 5% of plastic is getting recycled, where does the remaining 95% go? Moving next to health and environmental effects, just to recap a little bit. Through the production, packaging, and disposal of plastics, toxic chemicals are released into our air, food, and water, creating health risks to all of us, as well as affecting climate change. Thousands of chemicals are used to make plastic harder or softer or more flexible. Many of these chemicals are endocrine disrupting compounds, also known as EDCs. They can leach from plastics and cause hormonal imbalances, heart disease, greater risk of cancer, and reproductive issues. Plastic containing EDCs are found in food packaging, cookware, construction materials, our kids' toys, furniture, electronics, cosmetics, and so on. Perfluorinated chemicals, referred to as PFAS or forever chemicals, accumulate in the body and are used in Teflon cookware, the lining of food takeout containers, firefighting foam, and waterproof garments. Animal studies show that EDCs can cause DNA modifications that have repercussions across multiple generations. When we consume food or beverages contained in plastic, we're ingesting microplastics and leach toxins. Animals and fish, of course, eat microplastics, and this becomes part of our food chain. Through normal water and food consumption, it's estimated that the average person consumes 5 grams of plastic a week, which is about the size of a credit card. The entire ecosystem is affected. Every year, 8 million tons of plastic ends up in our oceans. And by 2025, less than 3 years from now, the oceans will contain 1 ton of plastic for every 3 tons of fish. And by 2050, the year my husband turns 100, there will be more plastic than fish in the ocean by weight. Turning next to chemicals and toxicity in plastic. For decades, AJ and I put every single little piece of plastic that we no longer needed in the recycling bin. And through the research we've done with the Sierra Club, we've learned that we were doing everything wrong. One problem area with plastics is that their production can leach toxic chemicals that continue to off-gas through their life cycle. The numbers 1 through 7 found on the bottom of plastic containers aren't recycling symbols, as I used to think, but rather indicate the plastic or resin the item is made from. Only numbers 1 and 2 are actually recyclable. 4 and 5 are too expensive to recycle, and 3, 6, and 7 aren't recyclable at all. I could give examples of products that fall into each of these 7 categories, but I thought for the moment I just focus on number 6, and that's PS or polystyrene. One version of polystyrene is styrofoam. And it's a common material for making single-use disposable plates and insulated cups, clamshell food containers, and these can leach benzene and styrene, which can affect our lungs, nervous systems, and reproductive organs. Of the tons of resins used to make plastic from 1950, the year my husband was born, to 2015, half of it was produced in just the last 13 of those 65 years. And this shows how much the rate of production is increasing. It doesn't sound like a sustainable model to me. It's important to recognize that children are the most susceptible to the health impacts from chemicals found in plastics. Moving on to single-use plastics. In this day and age, we can't completely rid ourselves of all plastics, but we can at least take steps to minimize the biggest part of the problem. Single-use plastics represent half of all plastic produced. They're used for an average of 15 minutes and are extremely difficult to remove from the waste stream. More than 1 million plastic bags are used every minute in the United States. Americans use around 50 billion, with a B, billion, single-serve plastic water bottles every year. Every second of every day in the US, 1,500 plastic bottles are discarded. And the process of producing bottled water requires 6 times as much water as there is actually in the container. Packaging is the largest end-use market, accounting for just over 40% of total plastic usage. As a matter of fact, the US produces more plastic waste per capita than any country. And it's not just food packaging, that's the problem. Amazon's plastic waste increased 33% in 2020 with their air pillows, their bubble wrap, and their plastic lined paper envelopes. Amazon produced more than 500 million pounds of plastic waste just last year. So much that Amazon's waste could circle the globe 500 times. I'm not making this up. So what are some of the barriers to change? Well, simply banning plastic outright isn't feasible. Plastic is present in every area of our lives, from healthcare to our cars, to our building materials, to our coffee makers. However, single-use plastics and certain household products don't need to be plastic. Our plastic consumption is cultivated by our throwaway culture, and because it's cheap and convenient. Another reason plastic waste and pollution has amassed so quickly is there is a complete lack of federal legislation. Currently, there are no federal laws restricting single-use plastics, the single highest contributor to our plastic waste problem. The US has left it up to individual states, counties, and cities to decide whether and how to regulate plastics. Another barrier to change is fueled by the oil and gas industry's efforts to sustain high plastic consumption while distracting us with recycling campaigns. Disinformation campaigns by oil companies blaming us, the consumers, for not recycling plastic are used to distract from the real problem. And that is recycling is rarely contributing to reuse in new products. Today's recycling processes and infrastructure are grossly insufficient to manage the complexity and the quantity of plastic waste. And it's in the oil company's best financial interest to continue creating new virgin plastic products. With the transition to more renewable power through electric vehicles, solar and wind, oil and gas companies are now doubling down on plastic production as their major growth market. The writing is on the wall. They are investing heavily in lobbying to obstruct the passage of greener laws. Plastics are set to drive nearly half of oil demand by mid-century. So before we talk about solutions to the plastic crisis, I just want to summarize what I've said so far. Health impacts. We've talked about how many chemicals, including endocrine disruptors, are added. Animal studies show that EDCs can cause DNA modifications that span generations. We know that there are plastics in our food chain and even in our blood. On average, we consume the equivalent of a credit card of plastic every week. The human body wasn't meant to do that. Environmental impacts. It's shocking to think that by 2050, there will be more plastic than fish in the oceans by weight. It's equally eye-opening that 50% of plastic produced is only used once for an average of 15 minutes. Changing the status quo is hard. It's tough to get people to use alternatives because plastic is so cheap and so convenient, but only 5% is ever recycled. Most ends up in landfills and isn't recyclable at all, even though the petrochemical industry would try to convince us otherwise. This industry is a powerful lobby, blocking laws that regulate plastic. We can see our electric and gas bills go up, so we curb our usage. It's just logical to do that. But we can't always see the impact of plastics on our environment or to our health and well-being. It's easier to kind of look the other way, especially when so many other concerns are making demands on us. But plastic doesn't biodegrade, and plastic waste is permanent. Well, let's talk a little bit about what some of the possible solutions are. Thankfully, we can go there. The main goal is to lower plastic production and use, and the low-hanging fruit is targeting single-use plastics. Disposing of it costs our cities and towns more and more every year. And the companies making single-use plastics don't pay for the waste management of their products. That would be us. We do. What if plastic makers were held financially responsible for their products' end-of-life costs? Just this year, a forward-looking piece of legislation was passed by the state of Colorado. Their new producer responsibility law requires manufacturers to pay dues into a state fund for the plastic packaging on products. We'll talk about some of the bans around plastic that exist in Massachusetts now. And while these efforts are admittedly here and there, it's a bit of a patchwork quilt, there is a foundation to address plastic pollution in our state. There are a wide range of possibilities for taking action, but we want to highlight just three. And those are banning single-use plastics, which is important because these products make up the majority of plastic waste. Pushing to install hydration stations could vastly decrease the use of single-use plastic water bottles. And while individuals can certainly change their buying habits with respect to plastic, we have in my household, the biggest impact comes from legislation and influencing corporate funding. Let's take a little bit of a scan at the first action to reduce plastic use, and that's plastic passing bans for single-use plastic. Well, why would we want to ban anything? We've already made the case that single-use plastic is devastating to our health and the environment. It makes up almost half of all plastic produced and in the waste stream. It's not biodegradable. Only 5% is actually recycled. Most of it ends up in the landfill or is incinerated, and that's bad for our health and the environment. And plastic production has outpaced recycling by 5 times in the last decade. So where are the opportunities to establish community bans? We're proposing these 4 categories: food packaging, beverage containers, including soda and water bottles, plastic bags, and plastic straws. And in Massachusetts, all of these forms of plastic have been banned in cities and towns here and there. And there's still more work to do. Taking a look next at food packaging bans. Polystyrene is commonly used in food packaging, where it comes in 2 forms, rigid and foam. Polystyrene is based on styrene, and that's a known neurotoxin and a probable carcinogen. As of last November, within Massachusetts, 54 cities and towns representing over 1 million people have banned some form of polystyrene. Some local communities have also banned the retail sale of polystyrene products. What can you do? Well, it happens that there are 2 acts in our state house right now in this category. The first is an act to reduce packaging waste. And it's proposing that on or after next January 1st, all food establishments will use food serviceware that's biodegradable, compostable, recyclable, or reusable for any food prepared or packaged on the premises. The second is an act to ban PFAS in food packaging. And it proposes that no PFAS at any amount will be allowed in the sale of food packaging products starting next January. You might be interested to know that Yelp has a new searchable attribute on their platform. And with these new attributes, consumers can easily find plastic-free eateries, bars, or cafes. It's a pretty cool development. Plastic beverage container bans. As of last November, In Massachusetts, single-use bottled water bans have been passed in 25 communities. And in April of 2019, West Tisbury on Martha's Vineyard became the first community in the United States to include all single-serve plastic beverage bottles in their retail ban. And the really cool thing about this is that that ban was promoted by a student activist group called Plastic Free Martha's Vineyard. You gotta love those kids. In addition, 5 Massachusetts communities have banned the sale of alcoholic beverages in small plastic bottles, also known as nips. This is one of my husband's least favorite things because they show up in our yard on a regular basis when people driving by throw their empties into our yard. Plastic bag bans. Massachusetts residents used more than 2 billion bags per year, about 1 bag per person every day, with a 15-minute lifespan. There's no systematic way to recover plastic bags from our lakes and oceans, and their aerodynamic qualities make them a huge source of plastic pollution. Plastic bags are rarely recycled due to their low value. Only about 5% of our plastic bags are recycled. But as of last December, there are now plastic bag bans in 148 communities, including ours, in Massachusetts, and it covers about 60% of our total state population. Some communities like Brookline are also banning polyethylene produce bags, which is, by the way, commonplace in Europe. You can't find them in grocery stores. Oops, going too fast here. Plastic straw bans. Several years ago, and maybe some of you have seen this, there was a gut-wrenching video of a sea turtle having a plastic straw removed from its nose. That went viral. And for many viewers, it was a painful reminder and a wake-up call to the global issue of plastic pollution. There are more than 500 million plastic straws used every day in the United States. But communities like Somerville are leading the way. Their retailers are no longer allowed to offer single-use plastic straws or stirrers unless a customer specifically requests one. And the fact is, there are alternatives to plastic straws in the form of bamboo or paper or even metal. So I'm here tonight because I would love to see us move forward with a plastic ban beyond the one we have today with plastic bags. Thankfully, as we've heard so far, there are all sorts of single-use plastic bans all across the state in Massachusetts. So what would be important for us is just to do a little fact-finding, identifying key people such as legislators and constituents who really care about this topic and want to see us make progress in it. We'll need to determine who influences them. And we have a huge ally with our Conservation Commission. Then we need to continue to raise awareness. This presentation is being made all over the state through Sierra Club members like me and AJ. And it's our hope that we can continue to do that. What we'd have to do is draft a bylaw, depending on which plastic category we wanted to ban, using draft language that's already out there. And then we'd have to modify the language for our community. And then when it's time to vote on the topic, we'd have to get out the vote. The Sierra Club has a great toolkit for all communities who are interested in plastic bans, and helps folks with a step-by-step process to do that. The second action to reduce plastic waste is plastic use is to install hydration stations in public buildings and schools. This is a picture of a typical hydration station, which has been mounted on an existing drinking fountain. The goal with hydration stations is to reduce plastic water bottle use and to keep it out of the landfill. The units retrofit to existing bubblers and drinking water fountains so users can fill their water bottles hands-free, their own personal water bottles. In schools and public buildings, people really have supported the technology because the water tastes better. There's a carbon filter in the mechanism that takes small particles out of tap water, so the water really does taste better. The stations have counters on them so users can easily see how many plastic bottles were saved from the landfill. I've been taking classes at Assabet for the last several years, and they have hydration stations all over their building. And it's astonishing. It's in the tens of thousands of plastic bottles that are in the landfill because of the hydration station. The Massachusetts chapter of the Sierra Club also has a checklist with tips and tools for folks who want to have hydration stations installed in their buildings. And I also learned that our elementary school in Berlin just installed them recently since the pandemic started. It's a great move forward. Oh, this is sensitive. The third action to reduce plastic use is to support the passage of state laws. It's the most far-reaching of the three actions that we're proposing. And the first step in this regard is to become an informed constituent. And you're taking a really important step right now in learning more about this crisis and what to do about it. Organizing our neighbors and the broader community is where grassroots climate goals are met. And the Sierra Club is able to support us in our organizing efforts. Advocacy can actually take a couple of forms. And sometimes it's an attempt to persuade our legislators to kill proposed bills outright. For example, when an industry, let's say oil and gas, is trying to expand its foothold by getting permits, and of all things, subsidies, our tax dollars, to build new plastic manufacturing facilities, we can just say no. Other times, advocates convey information to persuade our legislators to expand a bill. If a pending piece of legislation isn't broad-reaching enough, let's say it covers PFAS, we can seek to have the language modified. You might also be interested in addressing the plastic crisis more broadly, such as with the Conservation Law Foundation's Zero Waste Project in New England. The zero waste approach minimizes the amount of trash that's sent to landfills and incinerators from the get-go. What else can we do? We can continue to educate ourselves. Examples of places to go to get more information include the Mass chapter of the Sierra Club's website. It is loaded with great information about the plastic crisis. Beyond Plastics is an organization that I just learned about. It's in Bennington College in Vermont. Its CEO is a woman named Judith Enck, who was a principal in the EPA during the Obama administration. She's a genius when it comes to this topic. The Conservation Law Foundation's website is also great, and it's pushing currently for plastic bottle bans in all of our New England states. We have a reference list at the end of this presentation that includes the resources we use to create it, as well as gives you places you can go to find more information. Social media is another powerful way to let your voice be heard. One of our local business owners just posted on Facebook about buying from local artists, our local artists and craftspeople, both to support them and to avoid buying plastic for gifts, especially as the holiday season is approaching. You can bring your own bags whenever you go to a retail establishment, and you can buy alternatives like glass, or simply refuse plastic at the point of purchase. I'm going to call out my husband again because he's my favorite to call out. He is very public about refusing plastic at restaurants and in retail stores. And maybe it was because he was in the Army for all those years. I'm not sure. But he's got a really loud voice and people pay attention when he says, no plastic, no plastic, no plastic. We can also sign petitions. This takes very little time. The Sierra Club provides direct links to legislators for petitions. It's easy to do. The various wildlife organizations also do the same thing. It's a simple click and you're on your way. You can tell our U.S. House of Representatives, Lori Trahan, to support the Break Free from Plastic Act. And if passed, this bill would require producers of plastic packaging and products to create and finance their own waste and recycling programs. It would put the cost of plastic pollution on the industry that creates the problem. It would also prohibit specific single-use plastic bags and products that aren't recyclable. I would love to see us start a local group too, that is working on this issue, because that's really how bans get started and how they reach a good conclusion. Wrapping up the presentation before we get into questions and answers and comments. The main thing we need to do, folks, is lower our consumption. The plastic crisis isn't going to be solved through recycling because plastic production has outpaced recycling by 5 times. Individuals can help by practicing the 3 R's, refusing plastic, reducing its use, and reusing the stuff we've already got. We can select alternative materials like glass, especially for food and microwaving. We can be an example to others when we're offered single-use plastic at retail establishments and restaurants. We can raise awareness by educating ourselves. We can go to the Mass Chapter's Sierra Club website for information, as well as the other resources I mentioned. We can put pressure on manufacturers by contacting companies and restaurants when we see plastic in their offerings. I have a friend in the community who is a dog on the bone about contacting, Sue knows who I'm talking about. When she is buying a product from a company that alleges to have a sustainability practice, and yet they're giving us plastic in the products that we buy. We can put pressure on legislators. Our next local ban on plastics is something we really have to do. We can let our state representatives, we'll find out in the next election who those folks will be, that we support an act to reduce packaging waste and an act to ban PFAS in food packaging. And we can let Lori Trahan know about our support for the Break Free from Plastic Act that's currently sitting in the US House. The green banner on the bottom really summarizes the essence of this crisis. The explosion of plastics in just a generation has contributed monumentally to greenhouse gases, which fuel climate change, creating food, water, and air insecurity for all of us. The bottom line for this crisis is that we are at a tipping point and there is no planet B. It's said that the true work on the behalf of the environment is local. It's here, it's with us. For me, the crisis of plastic pollution is personal. This is a picture of our granddaughter, Gracie. I want her and all of our children to inherit a world where they don't consume a credit card worth of plastic every week. When we started researching this topic, our Sierra Club team wasn't aware of the full extent of this crisis. And we also didn't know how we as individuals could really do much. We can't change what's happened in the past, but I believe that us, each of us, are guardians of the future, and we can shape what happens. Our children and our grandchildren are depending on us. Thank you so much for spending your time with me this evening. I know you have other things you could be doing, so I'm grateful for your time and attention. And now I'd love to welcome your comments, your questions. I'd love to hear what's of particular concern to you and what I've said tonight, or what you might be thinking about doing in your own family with respect to changing your plastic use, or what you'd be willing to do more broadly outside of your home to address this crisis. So. Do we have any questions here or online? Paul?
I do. Excellent presentation. What I would like to know, I mean, what you're presenting and what you're talking about, I'm all on board with it. It strikes me that it's grassroots, which is often the way to get things going. What I would be interested in knowing, though, is does the Sierra Club organization have active lobbyists? It comes down to money. You know, the things you're talking about, yeah, there's going to be a fee for plastic manufacturers. It's going to get passed on to us. They're not going to swallow it. Our cost of whatever we're buying is going to go up, certainly. Within reason, that's certainly acceptable. But what's the Sierra Club doing on the bigger picture in terms of working with higher level government officials, manufacturers, where you have to be making inroads there first? If we wait for grassroots, it's going to be a long wait.
It is going to be a long way. Yeah.
And I've been involved and around the solid waste recycling industry for a good part of my life. And I'm a little bit skeptical.
Mhm.
You know, I'd love to see the things you're talking about, but the mechanization to make that happen is more complicated and convoluted than not buying a plastic water bottle.
I'm going to address that in a couple of ways, Paul. The first is to talk about Sierra Club, the activities, and yes, they do lobby at the state level, and not just as a single entity, but they're also partnering with other organizations like the Conservation Law Foundation. Greenpeace is also very active in plastic pollution. Beyond Plastics, the organization I mentioned in Vermont, is got a very strong voice in New England around this topic, as well as more globally. So we recognize as organizations largely of volunteers that, again, there's power in numbers. And that's the only way we're going to have our voices heard more broadly at the state level and regionally. The second thing I would say is innovation is coming in this space in really remarkable ways. I listened to a webinar a couple of weeks ago about folks who are harvesting seaweed to create alternatives to the plastic packaging that, have you heard about this too? That's used for frozen veggies and frozen fruit and things like that. It's happening slowly, but I think it'll pick up momentum as we figure out how to see seaweed as a crop like we do corn. They're also figuring out how to pelletize it like they do plastic pellets in that industry. So thankfully, innovation is happening in this space as well.
I know there's a company in Leominster that now makes biodegradable plastic dinnerware. I don't know the name of the company. I think I might have seen it on Chronicle or something. Certainly the cost of their product is more expensive, but it's going in the right direction. And I was recently at an event where, and I wasn't able to find out where they got them, but the coffee cups and everything, very sturdy, but they were not plastic. They were something that would dissolve in time. It was encouraging to see.
And there's no meaning to the term clean your plate.
Exactly. You know,
Eat it after you're done.
a lot of restaurateurs, those that are concerned about this topic, are moving to bamboo for their takeout utensils. So that's happening. I worked at a Fortune 5 company in Minneapolis before we moved here. And employees at that company were just sick and tired of all the cafeteria plastic and waste. And we got our company to move to zero waste in the big cafeterias using bamboo and sturdy cardboard. So,
The thing that galls me the most is you go into any convenience store and the amount of beverages that there is no deposit on the container.
Mhm.
I mean, it's the majority of beverages available.
mhm.
It's incredible. I don't know how that was allowed to happen.
Well, I think that if you think about the bottle deposit, the nickel or dime here,
Nickel,
nickel. Yeah, and that was passed in 82,
long time ago.
and that would be about 50 cents today. And if you went in and bought a bottle of soda and had to pay an extra 50 cents for deposit, then you might think, but a nickel, nobody bats an eye, they don't bother recycling or returning it because
Right, they throw it away.
yeah,
Nickel is
time's
money.
worth more than a nickel.
Right.
And the bottom line is those things just don't seem to work for a long period of time.
Well, they need to be adjusted.
Oh,
you
sure.
know,
Right.
Instead of a nickel, maybe it should be 25 cents today.
Yeah. or
And,
50.
and.
Yeah.
Or some numbers certainly, but there are so many beverages on the market that skate under that law. It's just outrageous.
I'm with you and AJ about nip bottles.
You know better than me.
Yeah.
How many there are out there.
There were a lot.
Yeah, how many?
And I thought at one point, why not make $1 deposit on each nip bottle? I mean, First of all, Highland Commons agreed in getting their permit that they wouldn't use it. And then they're, oh, we're such a disadvantage vis-a-vis our competitors because they all sell nip bottles. So we allow them to sell nip bottles, but now we're harvesting them on our highways and byways. So I thought, put $1 deposit on it, people will return them, but now I'm hearing that they can't be recycled.
I think they're number 7, aren't they? I can't remember what number they are, but they're not 1 and 2.
Right.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, even if they weren't 1 and 2, 1 or 2, they're so contaminated with so much paper because the label
And
is the percentage of paper, would make it impossible.
And $1 deposit would make it worth your time to collect them.
Yeah.
That's true.
What did you bring in?
$1
800 last year or
deposit
something?
to buy a bigger bottle.
Yeah, right.
I don't know.
But
Nice.
another thing you can do is when you order takeout, you can specifically tell them, if that's the one thing that kills me about takeout. I'm bringing it home. I have silverware.
Yeah.
I have silverware, I have plates, I have napkins. Ask me if I need it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Don't routinely put it in. And even at work, I keep a fork, a spoon, and a knife in my desk. When I go out and get lunch, I get soup at the supermarket or whatever. I use my own utensils. I rinse them off in the bathroom and put them back. I mean, there are small little things like that that you can do. And as more people make more choices, there is power in numbers. And if people decide to stop purchasing a specific thing because it comes in plastic, that company is going to notice and that company is going to do something to change. This is now my 3rd time seeing Ann's presentation.
Thank
And
you.
every single time, there are certain things that still hit me the same way. And other times I'm like, oh, every time I've seen it, there's been something else. But a couple of the larger things is that we need to make companies responsible for their packaging. If they're going to insist on using as much packaging as they are, we need to insist that it's packaging that can be either recycled or reused or biodegrade, or we need to make the companies responsible for. Maine did that, didn't they?
I have a question directly. How do you make Amazon, a company like Amazon, that is an oligopoly basically, and you do whatever they want? How do you make them responsible for their plastic packaging?
And it's so hard. I try so hard not to buy things from
I
Amazon.
do too. Yeah.
And yet, probably once a month,
Yeah.
I find myself buying something on Amazon.
Well, here's
Um,
the inconsistency. I've gotten things from Amazon where it's been paper, heavyweight paper instead of those plastic pillows. So what's in their decision tree that says use a plastic pillow when crushed paper works just as well as a cushioning agent?
You probably have a great deal of stock.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. I've been recycling everything, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, because I thought they were all being recycled. So what happens to 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 that I've been throwing in with the regular, with the other plastic?
It goes into the landfill, it's incinerated, or it ends up in our yard like nip bottles do.
No, but all this is mixed in the transfer station.
Yeah.
One plastic bin. It's either processed or it's incinerated or it's buried.
It goes to a sorting facility currently.
Yeah, Paul
in
knows
Auburn,
the inside
where
track
there's a
here.
Conveyor line with people on either side and they're picking out whatever they pick out. I've got a call into the company a couple times and haven't received any response yet from them.
What's your call?
About what happens to, what plastics actually get recycled and where does it go? To what purpose is it recycled? And, I'm still waiting on an answer.
So Paul's container must be common in many transfer stations around the world.
Yeah, they call it single stream recycling, even though it's multiple things in it.
Do your resources know what really comes of it? Is it they all sorted?
No, I'm relying on Paul.
It's a state secret, I think.
So should we still continue putting 3,
Mhm.
4, 5, 6, and 7 in with?
In this town, yes, because to get rid of plastics only costs us $60 a ton. If you throw it in trash, it costs us $110 a ton.
Okay.
So there's a financial
to know.
motivation.
Right. And it does.
Aside from the higher goal of what actually happens for town taxpayers, makes sense to recycle.
Okay. So it does get sorted,
Yes.
okay.
I think the important point to remember is plastic doesn't biodegrade. And at the end of the day, plastic is plastic is plastic. It doesn't return to the earth like compost or metal or glass. It's with us forever.
We have an online,
The
Just
same-
say
the same
no.
can be said for
Yeah.
glass,
we have
though, as
an
well.
online question.
Okay, could you tell me what it is?
It's made from sand and it returns to sand.
Yeah, right.
It's
It's
ground
ground
up.
to sand.
Well, it's
What
ground up.
planet are you from?
We have a person online who would like to ask a question. Andrea, if you could unmute.
Hi, Anne. It's Andrea.
Hi, Andrea.
I've been watching this and I'm so excited to hear about this. I'm in Texas and we have a major grocery store called HEB. Now, in
Yes.
the major cities, they have removed plastic bags completely from the grocery stores. But we are trying to get them to also remove them from the local grocery stores in the outer lying areas, not just the major cities. So how would we go about starting that process of requesting them to remove, besides just sending emails to the CEO or CFO. I mean, is there somewhere else that we can go? I know in my community, they're very upset about the plastic bags because we have a beautiful city park. Dad saw it when he took the kids. But there's plastic bags everywhere over there. And we have ducks and we have turtles and we have fish over there. And they're constantly in the ponds and in the grass and in the woods. So we'd like to have them removed, not just from the major metropolitan areas, but also the outer lying cities as well, where this grocer is.
Mhm, mhm.
Can they pass a local bylaw?
Are you, have you talked with your representative, your city council person, Andrea, or somebody in your town or your city?
We've gone to city council meetings. I can't tell you how many times it has been brought up at the city council meetings. And they refer us to contacting the grocer, which we have also done. And
Mhm.
really nothing has been done as far as, it's great that they do offer paper bags. You never see anyone taking them. People are really getting a lot more conscious about bringing the reusable bags, which is wonderful. I love that. But the plastic bags are still there. I know I have, in my job, we have a group at work about that is also trying to do this because a lot of them live, we work remotely. So a lot of them live in these outer cities and they're also trying to do the same thing. I'm just not real sure how much, just where else to go, because we've contacted the grocers, we've gone to the city council meetings. So I'm not sure if there's someone else that maybe have a bigger span than we do to try to reach out to this grocer to get them removed like they do in the big cities.
Mhm.
I think a lot of it is our city is just not removing, you know what I mean? Our city's not passing that like Austin did, or Dallas did, Houston did. The smaller cities is just not passing that.
If the grocery store hasn't removed them across the board, it's probably that they've removed them in towns where a plastic bag ban is banned. And that came up in the discussion is you got to get legislation because that's the most powerful tool for reducing these plastics.
Okay, so it has to be done at the city level here and then move on up that way.
Yeah.
I sure think so.
And a citizen's petition or some other, if the local government won't take it up, then the citizens have to demand that they do.
Okay, all right, thank you.
What keeps Massachusetts from enacting a statewide plastics ban? A lot of communities have individually.
Yes,
I
they
believe
have.
Hudson has, I know we have. A bunch of others, but why not the state? Why hasn't the state adopted it?
That's the question of the hour. I wish I had an answer to that. When I think about how long it's taken us to get the 2 bills out there that relate to food packaging, that's been a long haul. So it's just interesting.
I think
It's
we have
just
a new state
interesting.
senator coming on board who might be tuned into that. And I think also, I don't know about Meg Kilcoyne. She ought to be,
And just so you know, one of the candidates, I invited all of the candidates to come tonight, and Robin Kennedy was on Zoom. So she just signed off a few minutes ago. So she has now seen this presentation. So I'm hoping that that will be,
and nobody else tuned in.
nobody else even responded.
Guess they need some calls.
Getting state legislation passed is a project. The beekeepers tried for several years to stop a chemical called neonicotinoids
Mhm.
and struggled and struggled and struggled and struggled and struggled year after year after year. So getting a state, because the Farm Bureau was way against it. And getting a state level legislation passed is easier said than done. But could you bring up the slide, the Martha's Vineyard slide? It's got the Martha's Vineyard
Let's see
banner.
if I can find it.
And while you're doing that, just to make your life a little more complicated.
Yeah.
And they've figured out how to get it passed, what the legal language is and what the restrictions are. And it's all plastic beverage containers, not just water. I mean, that's incredible.
Mhm.
The
I-
AG passed it.
Yeah, I counted up and it's 7 towns out there that have done this.
Can we just simply replicate their marketing, their legislation, their language and propose it?
I don't know why not.
Carolyn?
That would be the best approach.
Yeah, I
Are you
mean,
talking about at the town level?
Yes.
Peter?
We're certainly not powerful enough to get the state level to move it. But we certainly can get the town level to move it. And we're known, Berlin's known already as a farming community, a pretty community, a well-run community. And this will just be another feather in our cap, I would say.
You know, the person who heads our toxics team lives in Brookline. And just recently, they got a nip bottle ban. They were going for the gusto. They were going for all categories of plastic beverage bottles. They got nip bottles, and Clint considered that a coup. He said, sometimes you can't get the whole enchilada,
right,
but you can get something.
right. You know, we may want to start with something smaller like plastic straws and poly and styrofoam.
In food packaging.
And food, right, in food packaging.
I think you're gonna find that the typical consumer is gonna be ignorant to this, and once they're educated, they'll either go for the entire enchilada or none,
The other
as you would say.
other battle within this battle is convenience.
Yes.
Of course.
And if, you know, you're a parent with several kids and time is of the essence, you're not gonna spend a lot of time thinking about what's the right packaging to buy or whatever. Kids need to be fed.
Sometimes
Need
there are definitely some
There's
people
no-
who are very conscientious about what they buy.
And they're trying to model and teach for their children.
Exactly. Yep,
Right,
I
but not
definitely
every-
know.
The problem is it's not everybody.
Sure.
It's,
Oh,
you know,
absolutely.
Across the board.
Yep.
And that's a segment of the enemy,
Mhm.
you know, the whole convenience factor.
I think you have a segment of the population that can readily be tapped. However, when you talk about PFAS contamination,
Ugh.
because a friend of mine is on the Worcester Rescue Squad, and he and a number of other Worcester firefighters have sued because of the PFAS that's in their.
In there,
turnover
right, yes.
And produced highly elevated levels of cancer. in the number of
Yes.
firefighters.
Yeah, it's
So I
horrible
think
stuff.
that's another constituency that could be brought into the, what are we doing? We're killing ourselves with this stuff.
The interior of bags, like microwave popcorn bags, and what are some of the others? Are known to have PFAS in them.
They're coated with it,
They're coated with it.
because then the popcorn one, it pops won't stick.
DuPont,
Inside of the bag.
this is a DuPont
Yeah.
product.
Yeah.
Mhm.
How about the steamer bags? Like you can buy frozen vegetables in a bag, you pop it in your microwave and steam it.
It's plastic and it leaches.
Right,
Yeah,
especially when you apply heat.
yeah. For I mean, I used to put plastic Tupperware in the microwave, and then I learned, wait a second, it's leaching, you know, micro beads and other horrible stuff.
Carolyn,
So
where
I
does the
didn't know.
Conservation Commission stand on this ban, so not the bags that you already banned, but
I mean,
greater subject.
we haven't, well, we certainly haven't taken any votes. We had Anne came and presented to us.
Couple weeks ago.
Yeah, like 3 weeks ago.
Mhm.
So, you know, I mean, one of the things that I wanted to do in helping Anne give the presentation to the town is to kind of get an idea of where the town people stand,
Yes.
you know, and see if there is an appetite for moving forward with any kind of restrictions on anything. You you know, so, yeah. Well, definitely 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
And
9,
whoever's
10,
online.
and 5, 6 people, 7 people online.
Everyone else is at home microwaving popcorn.
Exactly,
And PFAS
exactly.
bags.
Yep. So, you know, I think helping people understand, you know, I think just helping people understand the problem, the complexity of the problem, the depth of the problem, and then what we might be able to do at our level is the first step to trying to figure out where we go forward, if we go forward, and how we go forward.
Caroline and I had a conversation about the plastic bag ban. And I think prior to the ban, there was probably a lot of resistance. But I go into Market Basket now and people bring their own bags, or, you know, they take a paper bag. And I never hear anybody complaining about it. And you were talking about what you're noticing right in your backyard.
Oh,
Because
I live behind Highland Commons, and the amount of trash that I don't see now is measurable. I would, a couple of times a year, I'd have plastic bags in my trees.
Mhm.
I walk out behind, there's some wetland stuff back there, so I go out and check it out every once in a while. And the amount of trash that is not on that hill in back of Market Basket, it is a marked, dramatic difference.
Wow, nice.
That's great.
Yeah. And honestly, my seeing that trash there was my motivation for wanting to move forward with the plastic bag ban, other than the larger reasons. But
Yes.
it was a very personal
It
reason.
hit you where
And
you
it
live,
has
literally.
made a marked noticeable difference.
Does the town, with either of you or your organizations, is there anything beginning to rumble as far as getting?
We're hoping we're rumbling people now.
Right now. Let's rock and roll.
What I mean is, if PFAS is a concern and it's related, if that's a concern to public safety people, you would think that would be a constituency that would be willing to help join with others and get rid of this hazard to health conservation.
I think there are probably all kinds of allies out there that we're not even aware of. So my hope is that I can have many forums, and I want partners. So if you guys want to.
I actually have a question, Paul, for you. Is there a reason why we could not install a hydration station in this building?
That I'm aware of.
Right,
It
someone,
would just need to be, excuse me, cleared by public health authorities via the SHOBA, you know, the nursing. Because when it first appeared, my brain automatically went, well, people ultimately rejected bubblers because of sanitary reasons and so forth. I don't know how the personal hydration systems work, but it sounds like they're much improved and.
yeah, you just hold
safer. So
a bottle under it.
yeah.
Yeah.
It would seem to be a certainly viable alternative.
Yeah,
And it is in use in the school. you said.
yes.
Right.
At the
so
elementary
Yeah, all the
school.
public schools, I mean, Assabet,
if the
Tohoto,
schools are
and,
using it, that's kind of.
Right. But as far as the well here,
Well,
there's
this is a
no,
Public water supply.
it
so,
is,
yeah.
okay. Yeah, because I was wondering, and I guess that makes sense as far as I was wondering why there wasn't a bubbler here. But that makes sense. Just so, you know, using Ann's number of $900, even if it was $1,500, how much does the town spend on that bubble, you know, buying water?
Right.
And, you know, if it,
when you buy
and
water, You really don't know the source.
you don't know the source, it's in plastic bottles. So, and yes, those do get refilled, but I think.
What are they leaching into the water?
What are they
Sort of-
leaching into the water? So I think that feels, getting a hydration station installed in this building feels very doable.
You said that they have filters and that filters out the plastic.
The hydration station has a charcoal filter.
Yeah.
And it filters particulate matter in the water. So the water tastes pure. People like the taste better.
Plasticky.
Well, there's no plastic, because, yeah,
Minerals.
Gorelick Farms used to market Something Springs water. And I know for a fact that it was a well next to 140, Route 140 in Bellingham, but they called it Something Springs.
sure,
So,
yep,
okay, salty springs.
yep, yep. Yeah, so, I feel, and we've talked about, at least moving forward with that. It's a good first step. And,
If you
I
do
go
something,
direct to the select board on that.
we've already had, well, Peg is our liaison and she comes to our meetings and she seemed to feel like that was also not only for the water savings, but that it was a good, doable. Yeah. Yep.
She was gonna pursue how much we spend on,
Right, she was
Yes.
gonna
Yeah,
research
and
and
I
find
haven't
out how
heard back.
much, yeah.
so 2025.
it seems like a long way off for something that's a proven carcinogen.
You know what I see though, I mean. People pass all these things that are gonna improve, especially environmental things, by 2050. Because they don't have to
When he
worry
turns
about it.
100.
They don't have to worry about it then. Look, we passed this thing. By 2050, we're gonna cut, by 2025, this new law here in Massachusetts is gonna eliminate PFAS in firefighting equipment and foam and stuff.
But that doesn't.
Because the people who pass it don't have to worry about it for,
Yeah, but that doesn't prevent the town of Berlin, among other communities who have firefighters, from
yeah,
changing
yeah.
their stuff that they're wearing.
Anyway, I gotta get off my soapbox. So that's
One
my
idea is
plan.
you could take the model of Martha's Vineyard, post it on with a narrative on Berlin Facebook page, Berlin Connect, and say, hey, listen, we're the conservation board, we're thinking about commission. We're thinking about passing such a law here. How do you all feel about it? I'll post that.
And I can get model language through the Sierra Club for
Yeah, they have
the towns
resource
where,
page
for,
for that.
for really any of the bands that exist in the
But I
state.
think if it's done in Martha's Vineyard, not Belchertown.
I have friends that-
People will respect it, say, geez, they passed it, they've done something right environmentally and legally. And it
Plus,
won't
they
be
take that as well.
temporarily.
so if you've got an appetite for that. I'll post it.
Right, so maybe what we would do is start with, here are the kinds of things that we could look at pursuing.
Too complicated. People have to make decisions then. It's either I like the Martha's Vineyard model or I don't. If they like it, you implement it. If they don't, you do something lesser.
We'll talk later.
Well, and on this same slide, I think it's just amazing that for 10 years, Concord has had a plastic water bottle ban.
Yeah.
10 years. They were the first in the nation.
It was big on the news when it happened.
I can imagine it was. So,
This may sound really unrelated, but what would be good to know with Concord is how they deal with trash and recycling. And how that ban has affected those areas of their municipal government. Because that starts to tell the story.
it's a broader story. You're absolutely right. I have
You have to, it's like peeling
Yeah.
an onion.
Yeah.
You go one layer at a time to find out really what's at the core.
Right, and how it worked out.
I have a contact in Concord. I can ask her.
That would be
She's-
great.
She's very involved in these kind of topics too, so.
Excellent. Any more questions from anyone online?
You need to go, but thank you
Seeing
very
none,
much.
yeah.
Paul.
Thanks for
Thank
coming,
you.
Paul.
We'll be talking.
Yep, I think we should probably officially end the meeting.
Thanks to everyone online who's been with us, and to be continued.
Thank you. Ann.
Thank you.
Yeah.